The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Tuesday nights at NORAD were usually quiet, just the steady hum of cooling systems and the soft clicking of hard drives processing routine data. I'd been monitoring the same empty radar screens for 3 years, tracking weather balloons and commercial aircraft, watching for threats that never came. At 11:47 p.m., the board exploded with red. "What the hell?" I muttered, leaning forward in my chair. The main display showed dozens of red dots appearing along the Arctic approach routes. My training kicked in: count the tracks, verify the signatures, check for system malfunctions. But as I watched, the dots multiplied. 50, 100, 200. The klaxons hadn't sounded yet. That was my first clue something was wrong. I grabbed my headset and switched to internal comms. "Control, this is Orion at Station 7. I'm showing 512 inbound signatures, requesting immediate verification." Static. Then Marcus's voice crackled through. "Station 7, we're not showing anything on primary. Run a diagnostic on your equipment." I stared at the screen. The trajectory calculations were updating in real time. Altitude declining, velocity increasing, impact zones spreading across the continental United States. The system showed 16 minutes to first impact. "Marcus, I need you to look at this. Now." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "Orion, calm down. Run the diagnostic. You're probably seeing satellite debris or a solar flare artifact." But I was already moving. The diagnostic could wait. I needed to find Penelope. My sister worked 3 levels down in the communications center, and if these signatures were real, she needed to know first. The elevator descended through the mountain's core, past layers of reinforced concrete and steel. Cheyenne Mountain had been built to survive anything. I'd always found that reassuring. Now it felt like a tomb. The communications center was buzzing with activity, but the wrong kind of activity. Too many people moving too fast, voices strained with barely controlled panic. I spotted Penelope's workstation immediately. Her coffee mug sat next to her keyboard, still steaming. Her headset lay on the desk, headphone jack pulled loose, the connector still warm. "Sarah," I called to the emergency coordinator. "Where's Penelope?" Sarah looked up from her console, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. "She went topside about 10 minutes ago. Said she needed to check the primary antenna array. Something about signal corruption in the radar feeds." "Why? What's happening up there?" The elevator ride back up felt endless. Each floor marker seemed to take forever. When the doors opened, I ran for the surface access tunnel. The mountain's main entrance was sealed for the night, but the auxiliary exits were still functional. I punched in my security code with trembling fingers and stepped into the Colorado night. The antenna array stretched across the mountainside like a mechanical forest. Penelope's maintenance cart sat abandoned near the base of Tower 7, tools scattered in the dirt. Her radio crackled with static and interference. "Penny," I shouted into the darkness. "Where are you?" A faint voice drifted from somewhere above. "Orion? Up here. Don't come up, the ladder's compromised." I looked up and saw her silhouette against the starlit sky, 40 feet up the tower's maintenance ladder. She was working on something near the primary dish assembly, sparks flying from her welding torch. "Penny, get down here now. We have incoming. Almost finished. The primary feed has been sabotaged. Someone's been feeding false data to the tracking system for weeks." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean false data?" "The radar signatures, they're not all real. But the system's been programmed to show phantom contacts. Someone wanted us to think we were under attack when we weren't." "But Orion," her voice cracked. "Some of them are real. I can see the heat signatures on the infrared backup." But even as she said it, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A low rumble in the distance, growing stronger. I pulled out my phone and checked the seismic monitoring app I'd installed for earthquake tracking. The readings were spiking across multiple stations from Nebraska to Wyoming. "Penny, those aren't phantoms. Get down here right now." The rumble became a roar. Then the eastern horizon lit up with a flash brighter than the sun. The light painted the mountains in stark white relief for 3 seconds before fading to an angry orange glow. The electromagnetic pulse hit us 45 seconds later. Every electronic device within 200 miles went dead. The mountain systems, protected by layers of Faraday caging, flickered but stayed online. My phone died in my hand, the screen going black with a small popping sound. The maintenance cart's radio went silent. But Penelope was still up there, and now I couldn't reach her. I started climbing, The metal rungs were cold against my palms, and the wind whipped through the antenna array with a sound like screaming. Each step up felt like moving through molasses. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I kept climbing. "Penny," I called. "Talk to me." No response. The EMP had killed her radio. When I reached the platform, I found her unconscious beside the main array. Blood trickled from her nose, radiation exposure, maybe, or just the shock of the electromagnetic pulse. I checked her pulse. Strong but rapid. Her skin felt hot, and there was a metallic taste in my mouth that hadn't been there before. As I lifted her onto my shoulders, I could see the glow on the eastern horizon growing brighter. Multiple strikes. The signatures I'd seen weren't false. They were just the first wave. The climb down was a nightmare. Penelope's dead weight made every movement treacherous, and the metal ladder groaned under our combined mass. Halfway down, I heard the unmistakable whistle of incoming ordnance cutting through the air. We hit the ground as the second wave impacted. The mountain shook like a magnitude 7 earthquake, and chunks of concrete rained from the tunnel entrance. I dragged Penelope inside just as the radiation alarms began their terrible song, a rising and falling wail that meant death was measured in rems per hour. The blast doors were already sealing when we reached the main corridor. Marcus met us at the security checkpoint, his face grim behind his radiation mask. "How many confirmed?" I asked, still carrying Penelope. 47 impacts across the continental United States. The defense grid is completely down. We've lost contact with Peterson, Offutt, and Strategic Command. The entire East Coast is dark. I looked at Penelope, still unconscious in my arms. And the rest? Marcus's expression told me everything. 453 more inbound. Impact in 11 minutes. The phantom signals she found? They were covering the real ones. Someone wanted us confused when the actual strike came. The choice was simple but impossible. Stay with my sister and hope the medical team could save her, or get back to my station and try to restore some semblance of defense capability. The mountain systems were still functional, but without real-time data from the compromised satellites, we were fighting blind. I handed Penelope to the medical team and ran for the elevator. Back at Station 7, the display showed chaos. The electromagnetic pulse had scrambled most of our satellite feeds, but the hardened ground-based radar was still functional. The remaining inbound signatures were real, and they were spreading across the continent like a plague of locusts. I had 10 minutes to figure out how to stop them. The coffee mug still sat on my desk, a small reminder of the normal world that had ended 30 minutes ago. I pushed it aside and got to work. My hands were steady now. Training had taken over. But as I started typing commands into the defense system, I realized the horrible truth Penelope had discovered. The sabotage wasn't just about hiding the incoming missiles. It was about making sure our response would be too little, too late. Someone had been planning this for months. The defense console erupted in a cascade of red failure indicators. Each blinking light represented a critical system going offline: missile silos, radar installations, communication nodes. The electromagnetic pulse had done more than scramble our satellites. It had exposed the fatal vulnerabilities someone had built into our defense network. Ground-based interceptor site Alpha is non-responsive, I reported into my headset, watching another installation blink out of existence on the tactical display. My voice remained steady, but sweat dripped onto the keyboard. Site Bravo shows critical system failures across all launch tubes. Site Charlie. I paused, watching the last set of green indicators turn red. Site Charlie is completely dark. Marcus's voice crackled through the hardened communication system, each word clipped with barely controlled urgency. All stations, this is security control. We have confirmed hostile activity at multiple surface installations. Repeat, we have armed hostiles at surface installations. All personnel report to Level 5 immediately. This is not a drill. I stared at the tactical display, my mind racing through the implications. The remaining missiles were still inbound, 6 minutes 40 seconds to first impact, but our ground-based defense systems were being systematically destroyed. Not by electromagnetic pulse, by coordinated human sabotage. Orion. Sarah's voice echoed down the corridor, her footsteps pounding on the concrete floor. You need to get to Level 5 now. They're sealing the blast doors in 2 minutes. I grabbed my radiation detector and the portable backup drive containing the missile tracking algorithms. The elevator was already descending when I reached it, packed with technicians and support staff. The air reeked of ozone and fierce sweat. Everyone looked like they'd seen civilization die in real time, and maybe they had. Level 5 was organized chaos. The hardened command center hummed with desperate activity as personnel attempted to establish communication with the outside world. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens casting an eerie blue-white glow on faces tight with concentration. Commander Rowan stood at the main tactical display, his weathered face illuminated by the red constellation of hundreds of inbound tracks. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "Orion, thank God," he said when he spotted me. "We need those tracking algorithms. The backup computers are online, but we've lost 80% of our real-time data feeds." "Orion, thank God," he said when he saw me. "We need those tracking algorithms. The backup computers are online, but we've lost most of our real-time data feeds." I handed him the drive, the plastic case slick with sweat from my palm. "Sir, the ground-based interceptors are being taken offline by coordinated hostile forces. Someone's been orchestrating this attack for months. They knew exactly which systems to target and precisely when to strike." Rowan's expression turned granite hard. "How many interceptors do we have left operational?" I checked my notes, cross-referencing the failure reports. 12 confirmed operational. Maybe 15 if we can restore power to the backup systems at Site Delta. 12 interceptors, Rowan repeated slowly, for 453 inbound warheads. The mathematics of Annihilation was simple and terrifying. We could stop maybe 3% of the incoming missiles. The rest would find their targets, vaporizing cities and military installations across the continental United States. "Commander," a technician called from across the room, his voice cutting through the din of clicking keyboards and humming processors. "I'm getting intermittent communication from the surface. Penelope Carson is trying to reach us from the antenna array maintenance station." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Patch her through. Now." The speakers crackled with static and electromagnetic interference. Then Penelope's voice, weak but clear. "Level 5, this is Penelope. I'm at the surface maintenance station. I can see vehicles approaching from the east access road. Military vehicles, but they're not ours. They're setting up some kind of jamming equipment near the primary dish. Penny, get to the emergency bunker immediately." I said into the microphone, my voice harsher than intended. "You're exposed to lethal radiation levels." "Negative. I'm monitoring their communications on the maintenance frequency. They're speaking Russian, but that's not the critical intelligence. They're coordinating with someone inside the mountain. Someone with access to our security codes and system passwords." The command center fell silent, except for the persistent hum of computers and the distant rumble of ventilation systems cycling contaminated air. Commander Rowan grabbed the microphone with white knuckles. "Penelope, this is Commander Rowan. Can you identify any of the vehicles or personnel?" "Negative, sir. But they're not trying to breach the mountain. They're setting up communication equipment and what looks like a mobile command center. This isn't an invasion, it's a coordination hub. They're managing the entire attack from out here." Marcus materialized at my shoulder, his face grim beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Orion, we need to talk. Privately." I followed him to a corner of the command center, my stomach knotting with dread. Marcus had been base security chief for 8 years. If anyone understood internal threats, it was him. "That intelligence about someone inside the mountain," he said quietly, checking over his shoulder. "Your sister's right. We've been monitoring unusual activity in the computer systems for the past month. Someone's been accessing classified files, downloading defense protocols, copying satellite encryption keys." "Who?" "That's the problem. The access logs show authorized personnel, people with legitimate security clearances. But the pattern suggests someone's been systematically gathering information for a coordinated strike." I thought about the sabotaged antenna array, the phantom radar signatures, the precise timing of the electromagnetic pulse. How many people have access to all those systems? 12, including you, me, and Commander Rowan. The implications hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "You think it's someone in this room?" "I think it's someone who knew exactly when and how to disable our defenses. Someone who's been planning this for months." The tactical display updated with new information, each data point a sentence of death. The remaining inbound missiles had separated into 3 distinct groups, each targeting different regions of the country. The East Coast group was 3 minutes 50 seconds from impact. The Midwest group was 5 minutes 40 seconds from impact. The West Coast group was 7 minutes 30 seconds from impact. "Commander, I called to Rowan, my voice cutting through the tension. We need to prioritize the interceptor targets immediately. We can't stop them all. Rowan nodded grimly, his jaw set. What do you recommend? I pulled up the target analysis on my portable computer, the screen reflecting in my eyes. The East Coast group is targeting major population centers, New York, Washington, Boston. Combined population of 12 million. The Midwest group is targeting strategic assets, Omaha, Kansas City, the missile silos in North Dakota. The West Coast group is hitting ports and military installations, Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego. So we choose between people and strategic assets. Yes, sir. But there's another critical problem. The interceptors need real-time targeting data from the ground-based radar stations. If those stations are being compromised or destroyed, an alarm started blaring, its shrill tone cutting through the ambient noise. The main display flashed red as another set of indicators went dark. Ground-based radar station Foxtrot is offline, a technician reported, his voice strained. Station Golf is reporting massive hostile jamming. Station Hotel has gone completely dark. That's it, Rowan said, his voice hollow. We're fighting blind. The interceptors are useless without targeting data. I looked at the tactical display, watching the red dots creep closer to their targets like a slow-motion doomsday. In 3 minutes, the first warheads would detonate over the East Coast. In 5 minutes, the strategic targets would be hit. In 7 minutes, the West Coast would join the devastation. Wait, I said, my mind racing through possibilities. There might be another way. I pulled up the maintenance protocols for the mountain's communication systems, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The primary antenna array is still functional. If we can establish a direct hardline link to the remaining interceptor sites, we might be able to provide manual targeting data. Manual targeting? Rowan looked skeptical, his weathered face creased with doubt. That's never been tested under combat conditions. It's never been tested because we've never needed it. But the mathematics are sound. If we can get precise coordinates and velocity data to the interceptors, they can engage without the automated tracking systems. The speakers crackled again with static. Penelope's voice more urgent now. Level 5, this is Penelope. The hostiles are moving toward the main antenna array. They're setting up what looks like explosive charges. If they take out the primary dish, you'll lose all communication with the outside world. Rowan made the decision without hesitation. Orion, take a team to the surface. Protect that antenna array. We need that communication link. Sir, the radiation levels are manageable for short-term exposure. You know those systems better than anyone. If we're going to save anything, we need that link operational. I grabbed my radiation suit from the emergency locker, the heavy lead-lined fabric weighing down my movements. The dosimeter clipped to my belt was already clicking from the ambient radiation. The choice was clear but terrible. Go to the surface and attempt to establish manual control of the interceptors, or stay in the bunker and watch helplessly as the country burned. As the elevator rose toward the surface, I thought about the mathematics of destruction. 12 interceptors, 453 warheads, 2 minutes 30 seconds to the first impact. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor filled with acrid smoke and the sharp smell of burning electronics. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, and I could hear the distant staccato of automatic weapons fire echoing through the mountain's tunnels. The surface access tunnel stretched ahead of me, leading to the antenna array where Penelope waited, where hostile forces were placing explosive charges, where our final hope of mounting any defense was located. I checked my radiation detector. The needle was climbing steadily, but the levels were not immediately lethal. I had maybe 20 minutes before the exposure became dangerous. 20 minutes to save what could be saved. I started running toward the surface, toward the sound of gunfire, toward the last chance to stop the end of everything. Behind me, the blast doors sealed with a sound like the gates of hell closing. There was no going back now. The surface access tunnel stretched ahead like a throat leading to hell. My radiation detector's clicks merged with the echo of my footsteps on concrete, creating a rhythm that matched my hammering heartbeat. 20 minutes before the exposure became lethal. 3 minutes until the first warheads reached the East Coast. The mathematics of destruction were simple. I had to reach the antenna array, establish manual targeting control, and somehow neutralize the hostile forces before either the radiation or the enemy killed me. The tunnel curved upward, following the mountain's natural contours. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that seemed to move independently, and I could smell ozone mixed with something sharper, the acrid scent of burning electronics and gunpowder. The automatic weapons fire had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that made my skin crawl. My radio crackled with static. "Orion, this is Penelope. I'm at the antenna maintenance station. The hostiles have withdrawn to the communications van parked near the primary dish. They're not trying to destroy the array, they're trying to access it. Accessing it for what? Unknown. But they've got sophisticated equipment. This isn't random sabotage. They're attempting to establish some kind of uplink connection." I emerged from the tunnel into the afternoon light, squinting against the sun that seemed impossibly bright after the underground fluorescence. The antenna array sprawled across the mountain's peak like a metallic forest, dozens of dishes and transmission towers reaching toward the sky. The primary dish, a massive 70-foot structure, dominated the center of the installation. The black communications van sat beside it like a cancer, its sides bristling with equipment and cables that snaked toward the antenna control systems. 3 figures in military-style gear moved around the van, their faces obscured by tactical masks and goggles. They worked with practiced efficiency, connecting hardware and running diagnostics on portable computers. I pressed myself against the concrete wall of the maintenance building, my radiation suit making soft, crinkling sounds with each movement. The dosimeter on my belt clicked steadily, the radiation levels climbing as contaminated particles settled from the upper atmosphere. 19 minutes and counting. "Penny, where are you?" "Northwest corner of the maintenance facility, behind the backup generator housing." I moved carefully along the building's perimeter, keeping low and using the scattered equipment as cover. The mountain's communication systems were critical. Without them, we had no way to coordinate the manual targeting protocols. If these hostiles gained control of the antenna array, they could potentially intercept or redirect any signals we sent to the remaining interceptor sites. I found Penelope crouched behind the generator housing, her face pale but determined. She wore a standard radiation suit, her dosimeter showing levels similar to mine. In her hands, she held a portable radio scanner and a military-grade tablet computer. "What have you learned?" I whispered, settling beside her. "They're not Russian like I initially thought. They're speaking English with American accents. But that's not the critical intelligence." She handed me the tablet, its screen displaying a complex data intercept. "I've been monitoring their communications for the past 15 minutes. They're coordinating with someone inside the mountain, using our own security frequencies." The display showed a series of encrypted messages, timestamps indicating they'd been transmitted during the past hour. The encryption was military-grade, but the message headers were familiar. They matched the format used by NORAD's internal communication systems. "They have our encryption keys," I said, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. "Someone's been feeding them classified information." "It gets worse. Look at the message content I've been able to decrypt." I scrolled through the intercepted communications, my blood growing colder with each revelation. The messages contained detailed information about our defense systems, interceptor site locations, radar frequencies, communication protocols, even the specific timing of the electromagnetic pulse that had preceded the missile attack. "Mountain Base, this is Surface Team Alpha," came a voice from the radio scanner. "We have established the uplink connection. Standing by for Phase 3 authorization." "Surface Team Alpha, this is Mountain Base. You are cleared for Phase 3. Initiate signal intercept protocols on all outbound communications. Priority target is any manual targeting data being transmitted to interceptor sites." My hands shook as I processed what I was hearing. The enemy wasn't just attacking our defenses, they were actively intercepting our attempts to mount a counterattack. Every signal we sent to the interceptor sites would be compromised, redirected, or jammed. "Penelope," I said quietly, "we need to identify who's transmitting from inside the mountain. Can you trace the signal source?" She nodded, her fingers flying across the tablet's interface. "The signal is coming from level 5. Same frequency as our command center. But the encryption signature..." She paused, her face going pale. "The encryption signature matches someone with alpha-level security clearance." Alpha-level clearance. In the entire mountain complex, only 4 people had alpha-level access. Commander Rowan, myself, Marcus, and Sienna Walsh, the former NSA analyst who'd been working as a civilian contractor for the past 6 months. "Sienna," I whispered, the pieces falling into place. She's been downloading classified files for weeks. Marcus mentioned unusual activity in the computer systems. But she's not in the command center. She was assigned to the backup communication facility on level 7. The radio scanner crackled again. Mountain Base, this is Surface Team Alpha. We're detecting increased radiation levels. Recommend expedited timeline for Phase 3 completion. Understood, Surface Team Alpha. Initiating final data transfer now. Signal intercept protocols will be active in 60 seconds. I looked at my radiation detector. The needle was climbing steadily, and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, radioactive fallout from the electromagnetic pulse detonation. We had maybe 15 minutes before the exposure became lethal, and less than 2 minutes before the first warheads reached their targets. We need to stop them, I said, checking my equipment. If they intercept our targeting data, the remaining interceptors will be useless. Penelope grabbed my arm. Orion, there are 3 armed hostiles and sophisticated jamming equipment. How do we? We don't have to fight them. We just need to cut their connection to the mountain. I pointed to the thick communication cables running from the van to the antenna control systems. Those cables are carrying the intercept signals. If we can sever the connection, they'll lose their ability to interfere with our targeting data. The cables are armored and buried for protection against electromagnetic pulse. We'd need explosives or heavy cutting tools. I looked around the maintenance area, cataloging the available resources. Emergency repair equipment, backup power systems, chemical storage tanks for the diesel generators. Then I spotted what I needed, a rack of emergency oxygen cylinders used for high-altitude antenna maintenance. Oxygen cylinders, I said, pointing to the storage rack. If we can create a controlled explosion using the pressurized oxygen and the diesel fuel from the generators. That's insane. The radiation exposure, the proximity to the hostiles. Penny, in 90 seconds, the first warheads detonate over the East Coast. 12 million people die. If we don't stop the signal intercept, the remaining interceptors can't function. Everything dies. She looked at me for a long moment, her face reflecting the impossible mathematics of our situation. Then she nodded grimly. What do you need me to do? I outlined the plan quickly. Penelope would create a distraction on the far side of the antenna array, drawing the hostiles away from the communication van. I would use the oxygen cylinders and diesel fuel to create an improvised explosive device near the buried cables. The explosion would sever the connection and disable the intercept equipment. Once I trigger the explosion, we run for the tunnel entrance. The radiation levels will spike, and the hostiles will likely attempt to pursue us. Orion, she said quietly, if this doesn't work, it has to work. There's no alternative. She squeezed my hand, her touch warm even through the radiation suit gloves. I'll give you 2 minutes to get into position. Then I'll start the distraction. I moved carefully toward the oxygen cylinder storage, keeping low and using the scattered equipment as cover. The hostiles were focused on their electronic equipment, occasionally glancing at handheld radiation detectors. They knew they were running out of time too. The oxygen cylinders were standard industrial units, each containing compressed oxygen at 2,200 pounds per square inch. I selected 3 cylinders and a length of detonation cord from the emergency repair supplies. The diesel fuel came from the backup generator's storage tank. I siphoned approximately 2 gallons into a portable container. My radiation detector was clicking more rapidly now, the needle approaching the yellow zone. Contaminated particles were settling from the atmosphere, and I could taste the metallic tang of radiation on my tongue. 14 minutes before the exposure became lethal. Penelope's voice crackled over the radio, starting distraction in 10 seconds. I positioned the oxygen cylinders near the buried communication cables, arranged the diesel fuel container for maximum dispersal, and prepared the detonation cord. The mathematics of the explosion were approximate. I needed enough force to sever the armored cables without destroying the entire antenna array. A loud crash echoed from the far side of the installation. Penelope had knocked over a stack of equipment containers, creating a metallic cacophony that immediately drew the hostiles' attention. I heard shouting in English and the sound of running footsteps moving away from the communication van. I triggered the detonation cord and ran toward the tunnel entrance, my radiation suit hampering my movements. The explosion erupted behind me with a sound like thunder, sending debris and smoke billowing across the antenna array. The ground shook, and I could hear the distinctive whine of severed electrical cables discharging their stored energy. The communication van's equipment screens went dark, The intercept operation was disabled. Surface Team Alpha, this is Mountain Base, came a panicked voice from the radio scanner. We've lost the uplink connection. Repeat, we've lost the uplink connection. Mountain Base, this is Surface Team Alpha. We have hostile contact at the antenna array. The intercept equipment is down. Recommend immediate extraction. I reached the tunnel entrance as Penelope emerged from behind the equipment containers, her radiation suit torn but intact. Behind us, the hostiles were attempting to restart their equipment, but the severed cables had disabled their connection to the mountain's communication systems. Level 5, this is Orion, I said into my radio as we descended into the tunnel. The signal intercept has been disabled. You are clear to transmit manual targeting data to the interceptor sites. Commander Rowan's voice crackled through the static. Confirmed, Orion. Initiating manual targeting protocols now. First interceptor launch in 30 seconds. As we reached the bottom of the tunnel, I could hear the distant rumble of interceptor missiles launching from their silos. The sound was thin and mechanical, nothing like the dramatic roar of missiles in movies. But it was the sound of hope, the remaining 12 interceptors racing toward their targets at impossible speeds. Orion, Penelope said quietly, the radiation levels we were exposed to. I checked both our dosimeters. The readings were in the yellow zone, approaching the threshold for acute radiation sickness. We'd need medical treatment, but the exposure wasn't immediately fatal. We'll be okay, I said, though I wasn't entirely certain. The medical facility has potassium iodide and other treatments. The blast doors unsealed as we approached level 5, and I could hear the controlled chaos of the command center. Technicians coordinating with the interceptor sites, communication specialists attempting to establish contact with surviving military installations, medical personnel preparing for incoming casualties. But underneath the activity, I could hear something else. The sound of someone crying quietly, trying to muffle their sobs. The sound of someone who knew they'd been discovered. Commander Rowan met us at the blast doors, his face grim with both relief and suspicion. The manual targeting is working. We've successfully intercepted 4 warheads over the East Coast. But we need to address the security breach immediately. It's Sienna, I said without preamble. She's been feeding classified information to the hostiles. The encryption signatures match her security clearance. Rowan nodded grimly. Marcus is bringing her to the command center now. We need to determine the full scope of the compromise. As if summoned by his words, Marcus appeared at the far end of the corridor, escorting a figure in a radiation suit. Even through the protective gear, I could see it was Sienna Walsh, her shoulders shaking with suppressed tears. Sienna, Rowan said as they approached, we need to discuss your activities over the past month. She looked up at him, her face visible through the radiation suit's faceplate. Her eyes were red with tears, and her expression was a mixture of guilt and desperation. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. They said it was just intelligence gathering. They said no one would be hurt. Who said that? I demanded, stepping closer. Who's been running you? They approached me 6 months ago. Said they knew about my financial problems, my security clearance issues. They offered to help, but they wanted information in return. What kind of information? Defense system vulnerabilities, communication protocols, interceptor site locations. She was crying openly now, the words tumbling out in a rush. They said it was for defensive purposes, to identify weaknesses in our own systems. They said they were working with the Pentagon to improve our security. Commander Rowan's expression was ice cold. And you believed them? I was desperate. My security clearance was under review because of my gambling debts. I thought I was going to lose my job, my pension, everything. They said they could make the problems go away. The electromagnetic pulse, I said, connecting the pieces. You provided them with the exact timing and frequency specifications needed to disable our satellites. I gave them technical specifications. I thought they were conducting theoretical vulnerability assessments. And the ground-based interceptor sites? The radar stations? Location data, communication frequencies, automated response protocols. She was sobbing now, her voice barely audible. They said they were improving our defenses. The tactical display updated behind us, showing the progress of the interceptor missiles. 5 warheads successfully destroyed over the East Coast. 3 more intercepted over the Midwest. The remaining interceptors were racing toward the West Coast group, but the mathematics were still terrible. We might stop 12 warheads out of more than 400. Sienna, Rowan said quietly, how many people are going to die because of the information you provided? She looked at the tactical display, at the red dots representing incoming warheads that our compromised defenses couldn't stop. Her face went white with the realization of what she'd done. "Hundreds of millions," she whispered. "Oh God, hundreds of millions." An alarm started blaring, and one of the technicians called out, "Commander, we're detecting a second wave of launches. Multiple sites across the Pacific. Estimated time to impact, 45 minutes. I stared at the tactical display as new red dots appeared, representing another wave of destruction heading toward the United States. The first wave had been devastating, but this second wave would finish what the first had started. "How many?" Rowan asked. "Preliminary count shows 320 additional warheads. Mixed delivery systems, ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, intermediate-range missiles from mobile launchers." The command center fell silent except for the humming of computers and the distant sound of Sienna's crying. We'd used our remaining interceptors against the first wave. We had no defense against the second wave. "Commander," I said, my voice hoarse, "we need to consider the emergency protocols." Rowan nodded grimly. Emergency protocols meant abandoning the surface, sealing the mountain, and waiting for the radiation to subside. It meant accepting that most of the United States would be uninhabitable for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rowan announced to the command center, "we are implementing Emergency Protocol 7. All personnel report to designated shelter areas. Seal all blast doors and activate the closed-loop life support systems." As technicians began shutting down non-essential systems and securing classified materials, I looked at Sienna Walsh. She sat in a corner of the command center, still crying quietly, the weight of her betrayal finally settling on her shoulders. "Sienna," I said, sitting beside her, "there's something else. You've been inside the mountain for months. You know the systems, the personnel, the security procedures. If there's anything else you can tell us, anything that might help us survive what's coming, now is the time." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "There's something else. Something I didn't tell them because I thought it was too dangerous." "What?" "The mountain's auxiliary power systems. They're connected to a geothermal tap that goes down to the magma chamber. If the surface installations are destroyed, the geothermal system can provide power for years. Decades even. That's standard emergency protocol information. No, you don't understand. The geothermal system isn't just for power. It's connected to a series of underground vents that can be used for communication. Low-frequency radio signals that can penetrate hundreds of miles through solid rock." I felt a spark of something that might have been hope. Communication with other underground installations? Potentially. And there's more. The system was designed with expansion capabilities. If we can establish communication with other surviving installations, we might be able to coordinate a network of underground facilities. Commander Rowan had been listening, and now he stepped closer. "Sienna, are you suggesting we might be able to maintain communication with other command centers?" "I'm suggesting we might be able to do more than just survive. We might be able to coordinate a response." I looked at the tactical display, at the incoming warheads that would soon turn the surface world into a radioactive wasteland. Then I looked at Sienna Walsh, whose betrayal had helped make this disaster possible, but whose technical knowledge might be our only hope of building something from the ruins. "Sienna," I said quietly, "you're going to help us survive this, and then you're going to help us fight back." She nodded, wiping the tears from her face. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done." The blast doors sealed with a sound like the world ending. Outside, the second wave of warheads was 42 minutes from impact. Inside the mountain, 43 people prepared to witness the end of civilization and the beginning of something else. Something that would rise from the ashes of betrayal and emerge from the underground darkness with a fury that would make the enemy regret they'd ever thought to destroy America. The real war was just beginning. The tactical display painted our failure in stark numerical terms. 12 interceptors launched, 8 warheads destroyed, 412 still inbound. Time to first impact, 67 seconds. I stood in the command center, my radiation suit still damp with sweat from the surface mission, watching red dots crawl across the map of America like a spreading infection. Each dot represented the obliteration of everything I'd spent my career protecting. The mathematics were brutally simple. We had failed catastrophically. "Orion," Commander Rowan's voice cut through the controlled chaos of technicians securing classified materials. "The geothermal communication system Sienna mentioned. How quickly can we establish contact with other installations? I looked at Sienna Walsh, who hunched over a workstation with Marcus standing guard beside her. Her fingers trembled as they moved across the keyboard, pulling up technical specifications. The betrayal was complete. Now came the desperate mathematics of survival. The low-frequency transmitters are hardwired into the mountain's original construction, she said, her voice barely audible over the warning klaxons. They've been dormant for decades, but the infrastructure is intact. Tested or not, they're our only option for coordinating with other surviving facilities. Rowan moved to the main display, where a technician was updating the impact projections. What's the maximum range? Theoretically, signals could penetrate through solid rock for up to 800 miles. But the equipment needs to be recalibrated for the new frequency range. 49 seconds to impact. The blast doors completed their seal with a resonant clang that seemed to echo through my bones. The air recycling systems kicked in with a mechanical wheeze, beginning the long task of keeping 43 people alive in a concrete tomb. The taste of recycled air was metallic, tinged with the ozone residue from the electromagnetic pulse that had preceded the nuclear strikes. How long for the recalibration? I asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less if the automated systems cooperate. I looked at the tactical display. The first wave of warheads would hit the East Coast in 38 seconds. The second wave, still climbing over the Pacific, would reach the West Coast in 41 minutes. 20 minutes to establish communication with other installations. 21 minutes to coordinate whatever response we could manage. Do it, Rowan ordered. Marcus, escort Sienna to the geothermal facility. Orion, you're in charge of the recalibration. I want communication established with Colorado Springs, Offutt Air Force Base, and the Pentagon's alternate command facility. Sir, one of the technicians called out, we're receiving an emergency transmission from the surface. It's from the antenna array. The main speakers crackled with static, then cleared to reveal a voice speaking in accented English. NORAD Command, this is Surface Team Alpha. We have re-established partial communication with the antenna array. We know you can hear us. Commander Rowan grabbed the microphone. This is NORAD Command. Identify yourself. We are the advanced team for the People's Liberation Army Special Operations Division. We have a message for whoever is listening. The command center fell silent except for the humming of computers and the distant rumble of the life support systems. I felt ice forming in my stomach as I realized what we were hearing. The nuclear strike you have witnessed is not the end of our operation. It is the beginning. In 3 hours, when the radiation levels have decreased sufficiently, we will begin Phase 4 of our mission. What is Phase 4? Rowan demanded. The complete neutralization of all remaining American military installations. We know the locations of every underground command facility, every missile silo, every strategic bomber base. We have detailed intelligence on your survival protocols and your emergency response procedures. I watched the first warheads reach the East Coast through the clinical abstraction of the tactical display. 4 red dots disappeared from the screen, replaced by expanding circles that represented destruction zones. New York, Washington, Boston, Philadelphia. The numbers that followed were incomprehensible. 43 million dead in the first 30 seconds of nuclear war. My hands shook as I reached for the microphone. Surface Team Alpha, this is NORAD Command. We hear you clearly. We also know about the geothermal communication system, the voice continued. We know about the low-frequency transmitters that you believe will allow you to coordinate with other installations. We know because we have had access to your classified information for months. I looked at Sienna, whose face had gone ash-white as she stared at the speakers. She had provided them with far more than defense system vulnerabilities. She had handed them the architectural blueprints for America's survival. Commander, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us. If they have complete intelligence on our emergency protocols, then every move we make is compromised. Then we improvise, Rowan replied grimly. We find solutions they don't expect because they don't exist in any manual. In 3 hours, we will begin systematic elimination of every underground facility in the continental United States. You have one option for survival: unconditional surrender. The transmission cut out, leaving us with static and the relentless updating of the tactical display. Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, Miami. Each city's disappearance marked by a brief flash on the screen and a casualty count that climbed past all comprehension. The death toll exceeded 100 million within 12 minutes, and the second wave hadn't even reached the West Coast yet. They're not just destroying our military capacity, I said, watching the pattern of destruction. They're eliminating our entire civilization. Commander, I said quietly, they're right about the geothermal system. If they have our technical specifications, they can jam the transmissions or triangulate our location. Then we modify the system, change the frequencies, alter the transmission protocols, make it work despite their intelligence. I looked at Sienna, who was now crying quietly again. Sienna, the geothermal system. What modifications are possible? She wiped her eyes and forced herself to focus on the technical problem. The transmitters are designed for flexibility. We can change frequencies, adjust power levels, even modify the signal patterns. But if they're monitoring for our transmissions, they'll detect any signal we send, I finished. Unless we can mask the transmission somehow. Wait, she said, her voice gaining strength as she worked through the problem. The geothermal system isn't just for communication. It's also used for monitoring seismic activity in the region. If we can disguise our communications as routine geological data, they might not recognize it as military communication, I said, understanding where she was going. But the other installations would need to know what to look for. There's a chance. The geological monitoring protocols are standardized across all military installations. If we embed our communication data within the seismic readings, it might pass unnoticed. Commander Rowan was listening while monitoring the tactical display. More cities were disappearing from the screen: Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, Seattle. The West Coast was being systematically destroyed, and the death toll had passed 150 million. How long to implement the modifications? He asked. 30 minutes. Maybe less if the automated systems don't fight us. Do it. And Sienna, he paused, looking at the woman whose betrayal had made this disaster possible. This is your chance to save what's left of your country. Don't waste it. She nodded and headed for the door with Marcus' escort. I followed, my mind racing through the technical challenges ahead. The geothermal facility was located on level 7, deeper in the mountain than any other installation. The descent would take us through the heart of the mountain's defensive systems: blast doors, automated security protocols, and redundant life support systems. The descent to level 7 took us through the mountain's defensive core: blast doors designed to withstand nuclear strikes, automated security systems that could operate independently for years, and redundant life support systems that connected to the geothermal power source deep in the Earth's crust. Each level we passed felt like descending into a more desperate version of reality. The geothermal communication system was designed during the Cold War, Sienna explained as we walked through corridors lined with pipes and cables. It was meant to be a last resort communication method if all satellites and surface installations were destroyed. Like now, I said grimly. Exactly like now. But there's something else about the system, something that never made it into the official specifications. Orion, Sienna said as we reached the blast doors leading to level 7. There's something else about the geothermal system. Something I didn't mention because I thought it was too dangerous. What now? The system isn't just connected to other military installations. It's connected to a network of civilian emergency shelters that were built during the Cold War. Most of them have been abandoned, but some might still have people in them. I stopped walking. How many shelters? Dozens, maybe hundreds, spread across the entire continental United States. If we can establish communication with them, we might be able to coordinate a resistance network, I said, the implications hitting me. Civilian survivors, military personnel, anyone who made it to an underground shelter. The problem is, most of the shelters aren't designed for long-term survival. They have limited food supplies, basic life support systems, minimal communication equipment. They'll need help. The geothermal facility occupied a vast chamber carved directly from the mountain's bedrock. The low-frequency transmitters were built into the walls themselves, massive copper conductors that extended deep into the Earth's crust, designed to use the planet as a communication medium. The technology was crude by modern standards, but it was also completely immune to electromagnetic pulse and satellite jamming. The system can reach any installation with similar equipment, Sienna said, activating the primary console. But the signal strength degrades rapidly with distance. We might be able to reach Colorado Springs, but anything beyond 500 miles will be marginal. I studied the technical specifications while she worked. The mathematics were challenging, low-frequency signals that could penetrate solid rock, but at the cost of extremely slow data transmission rates. We could send messages, but not in real time. Each transmission would take minutes to encode, transmit, and decode. How do we mask the transmissions from enemy detection? I asked. We embed the communication data within routine geological monitoring signals. The mountain seismic detection system transmits data constantly: earthquake monitoring, geological surveys, subsurface mapping. If we can make our communications look like routine geological data, they might not recognize it as military traffic. I finished, understanding the concept. But the receiving stations would need to know what to look for. The main display updated with more destruction from the surface. The second wave was approaching the west coast: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. In 28 minutes, the Pacific coast would be uninhabitable. The death toll had passed 200 million and was climbing toward the total population of the United States. Marcus, I called to the security chief. What's the status of the surface monitoring systems? Most of the external sensors are offline due to electromagnetic pulse damage, but we're still receiving radiation readings from the automated detection grid. Surface radiation levels are climbing rapidly. How bad? Lethal exposure in less than 10 minutes. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I looked at the tactical display on the facility's secondary monitor. The first wave of warheads had finished their work. Every major city on the East Coast was gone. The second wave was approaching the West Coast, 34 minutes to impact. The death toll had passed 200 million and was climbing toward 300 million. Orion, Sienna said, I've got the frequency modifications ready. The system can disguise communication data as seismic readings, but the receiving installations will need to know what to look for. What kind of signal pattern? Artificial seismic spikes that correspond to specific data values. To anyone monitoring the geological data, it will look like routine earthquake activity. But if you know the encoding pattern, you can extract the embedded communication data. I finished. Brilliant. But we need to establish contact with at least one other installation to test the system. The closest military installation with similar equipment is Colorado Springs. They're 400 miles away, well within the theoretical range of the geothermal system. I initiated the first transmission sequence, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what we were attempting. The low-frequency transmitters hummed to life, sending signals deep into the Earth's crust. If the system worked, those signals would travel through hundreds of miles of solid rock and emerge at distant installations disguised as routine seismic activity. Colorado Springs, this is NORAD command transmitting on emergency geological frequencies. We are embedded in routine seismic data stream 77 Alpha. Decode and respond if you receive this message. The waiting was excruciating. On the tactical display, the West Coast was being systematically destroyed. Each city's obliteration registered as a brief flash followed by casualty estimates that had lost all meaning. The death toll exceeded 250 million, representing the collapse of American civilization within 37 minutes. Static filled the speakers, then cleared to reveal a voice distorted by the low-frequency transmission. NORAD command, this is Colorado Springs. We are decoding your geological data stream. Signal strength is marginal but readable. What is your operational status? I felt a surge of desperate hope. Colorado Springs, surface installations are completely destroyed. We are operating from sealed underground facility with 43 personnel. Life support is stable for approximately 6 months. What is your situation? NORAD command, we suffered 3 direct nuclear strikes on surface installations. Underground command facility is intact with 62 personnel. We have established contact with Peterson Air Force Base and 1 civilian shelter in the Denver area. The tactical display completed its grim update. The West Coast was gone. Total casualties exceeded 300 million, essentially the entire population of the United States. But scattered across the country, in deep underground facilities, people were still alive. The question was whether we could coordinate their survival long enough to mount some kind of resistance. Colorado Springs, we need you to establish contact with other installations using the same frequency pattern. Priority targets are Offutt Air Force Base, Peterson Air Force Base, and any surviving civilian shelters in your area. Understood. What about the enemy surface teams? They're planning systematic elimination of all underground facilities. We have approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes before they begin Phase 4 operations. The tactical display updated, showing the West Coast under attack. I watched as red dots disappeared from the screen, replaced by expanding circles of destruction. The death toll passed 300 million and was climbing toward the total population of the United States. "Orion," Sienna said quietly, "I've been thinking about what the enemy said, about systematic elimination of underground facilities. They don't just have our technical specifications, they have our locations. All of them? Every military installation, every government bunker, every strategic facility. They've been planning this for months, maybe years." I realized she was right. The attack wasn't random or opportunistic. It was a carefully planned operation designed to completely destroy the United States as a functioning nation. The nuclear strikes were just the beginning. "But they don't have the civilian shelter locations," I said, understanding the implications. "Those facilities were built during the Cold War under different security protocols. The information is classified, but it's not part of the modern military database. The civilian shelters are our only hope," she said. "If we can establish communication with them, coordinate their resources, maybe we can build something from the ruins." The speakers crackled with another incoming transmission. "NORAD Command, this is Offutt Air Force Base. We're reading your geological transmissions. What's the situation?" "Offutt, this is NORAD Command. The United States is under systematic nuclear attack. We're coordinating survival operations through the geothermal communication network. What's your status?" "We took 2 direct hits, but the underground command facility is operational. We have 47 personnel, life support for 6 months. We're also in contact with a civilian shelter approximately 200 miles southeast of our location." I felt a surge of hope. "Civilian shelter? How many people?" "Approximately 300 civilians. They're in an abandoned Cold War facility that was reactivated after the first wave of attacks. They have limited supplies, but they're organized and they're asking for instructions." The tactical display completed its update. The second wave was finished. The entire United States was now uninhabitable on the surface. Total death toll, approximately 320 million people. But scattered across the country, in underground facilities and abandoned shelters, people were still alive. "All stations, this is NORAD Command," I said into the microphone. "We are establishing a survival network using geological communication frequencies. Priority mission is to locate and coordinate with all surviving facilities, both military and civilian." "NORAD Command, this is Peterson Air Force Base. We have contact with 2 civilian shelters in the Colorado region. Total population approximately 400 people." "NORAD Command, this is Malmstrom Air Force Base. We have contact with 1 civilian shelter in the Montana region. Population approximately 150 people." Over the next 20 minutes, reports came in from across the country. Underground facilities that had survived the initial attacks. Civilian shelters that had been activated by local emergency management agencies. Even some improvised shelters in subway systems and underground parking garages. The numbers were small, perhaps 10,000 people scattered across the entire continental United States. But they were organized, they were communicating, and they were asking for leadership. "Sienna," I said, looking at the woman whose betrayal had made this disaster possible, "you're going to help us coordinate this network. You're going to help us survive, and then you're going to help us fight back." She nodded, her face wet with tears but determined. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done." Commander Rowan's voice crackled over the internal communication system. "Orion, report to the command center immediately. We have a problem." I made my way back through the mountains corridors, leaving Sienna and Marcus to continue establishing communication with the scattered survivors. The command center was buzzing with activity. Technicians monitoring the geothermal network, communications specialists coordinating with the distant shelters, medical personnel preparing for long-term survival operations. "Commander, what's the situation?" "The enemy surface teams are beginning Phase 4 operations ahead of schedule. They're using helicopters and ground vehicles to approach the known locations of underground facilities. First target appears to be Peterson Air Force Base." I looked at the tactical display, where new red dots were appearing. Not warheads this time, but enemy forces moving across the devastated landscape. They were systematic, methodical, and they knew exactly where they were going. "How long before they reach us?" "Approximately 90 minutes. They're taking their time, probably waiting for radiation levels to decrease. But they're coming." I thought about the geothermal communication network, about the scattered survivors across the country, about the civilian shelters that represented the only hope for America's future. We had 90 minutes to coordinate a response, to turn a collection of isolated survivors into something resembling a resistance movement. "Commander," I said, "I need full authorization to coordinate military operations through the geothermal network. We're going to turn this mountain into the command center for a war that's going to last decades." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded grimly. "You have full authorization. Save what's left of America, Orion." "That's an order." I returned to the geothermal facility, where Sienna had established communication with 17 installations across the country. The network was growing, but it was fragile and scattered. We had 90 minutes to turn it into something that could fight back. "All stations, this is NORAD command," I said into the microphone. "Enemy forces are beginning systematic elimination of underground facilities. We are now at war. Prepare for coordinated resistance operations." The real war was just beginning. And from the depths of Cheyenne Mountain, surrounded by the radioactive ruins of America, we were going to fight back. The geothermal communication array hummed with desperate activity as reports flooded in from across the continental United States. 17 installations confirmed operational. 8 civilian shelters established contact. Total surviving population, approximately 12,000 souls scattered across 3 million square miles of radioactive wasteland. I stood before the primary console, my radiation suit finally removed after 6 hours of continuous wear, watching the tactical display update with enemy movement patterns. The attacking forces had deployed systematic elimination teams to every known underground facility. Their intelligence was perfect. They knew the exact location of every military installation, every government bunker, every strategic facility built since 1960. The speakers crackled with a transmission from the surface. "NORAD command, we have established communication with the surviving personnel inside your mountain. We know you are listening." I grabbed the microphone, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what we were facing. "This is NORAD command. Identify yourself. We are the advanced team conducting Phase 4 elimination operations. We have a message for the 43 survivors in your facility." Commander Rowan appeared beside me, his face grim. "The enemy forces had reached us ahead of schedule. In 60 minutes, we will begin systematic penetration of your facility. You have developed what you believe is an untraceable communication network using geological frequencies. We know because we have monitored every transmission." I felt ice forming in my stomach. They had been listening to our communications with the civilian shelters. Everything we had done to hide the survivor network had been compromised. "We also know the locations of the civilian shelters you have contacted. We will eliminate them after we complete operations at your facility." Sienna's face went white as she stared at the speakers. The deception we had hoped to implement was already unnecessary. They had complete intelligence on our survival network. "You have one option: surrender and provide complete cooperation with our occupation forces. Otherwise, we will eliminate every American survivor we can locate." The transmission cut out, leaving us with static and the knowledge that our desperate plan had already failed. I looked at the tactical display, watching installations disappear one by one. The systematic destruction of American military resistance was proceeding exactly as planned. Within 2 hours, every military installation in the continental United States would be destroyed or captured. "Sienna," I said quietly, "the civilian shelters. Can we warn them?" "Not without revealing their locations to the enemy. They're monitoring our geological frequencies. Every transmission we send leads them directly to another group of survivors." I understood the terrible mathematics of our situation. Every attempt to help the civilian shelters would result in their discovery and elimination. The communication network that was supposed to coordinate their survival had become the tool of their destruction. Then we cut all communications. Complete blackout. They already know the locations. It's too late. The speakers crackled with another transmission. "NORAD command, this is Peterson Air Force Base. We have visual contact with enemy forces. They're using helicopters and ground vehicles equipped with sophisticated detection equipment. We're implementing Protocol 77 Alpha." Another installation gone. Another group of American military personnel sacrificing themselves to deny the enemy access to classified information. The death toll was climbing, not just from the nuclear strikes, but from the systematic elimination of everyone who had survived the initial attack. "How long before they reach us?" I asked. "Approximately 45 minutes. They're moving faster than we anticipated." I looked around the geothermal facility. The low-frequency transmitters were built into the mountain itself, massive copper conductors that extended deep into the Earth's crust. They were designed to be undetectable by conventional means, but the enemy forces had proven that their intelligence was far more sophisticated than we had imagined. Sienna, can they detect the geothermal communication system? The transmitters are hardwired into the mountain's geological structure. They should be invisible to conventional detection equipment. But if they have our technical specifications, they know exactly what to look for, I finished grimly. The speakers crackled with another transmission. NORAD command, this is Offutt Air Force Base. We are implementing Protocol 77 Alpha. Enemy forces have breached our outer defenses. Another installation gone. Another group of American military personnel sacrificing themselves to deny the enemy access to classified information. The death toll was climbing, not just from the nuclear strikes, but from the systematic elimination of everyone who had survived the initial attack. All stations, this is NORAD command, I said into the microphone. We are implementing Communication Protocol Delta 7. All civilian shelters are to maintain complete electronic silence until further notice. Military installations are to prepare for Protocol 77 Alpha implementation. NORAD command, this is Colorado Springs. We have established contact with 6 civilian shelters in the Colorado region. Total population approximately 800 people. Are you ordering them to cease all communication? Affirmative. Complete electronic blackout. It's the only way to keep them invisible to enemy detection systems. NORAD command, this is Malmstrom Air Force Base. We have visual contact with enemy forces. They're using helicopters and ground vehicles equipped with sophisticated detection equipment. We're beginning Protocol 77 Alpha implementation. I watched another installation disappear from the tactical display. The systematic destruction of American military resistance was proceeding exactly as the enemy had planned. Within 2 hours, every military installation in the continental United States would be destroyed or captured. Orion, Commander Rowan's voice came through the internal communication system. We need to discuss our options. The enemy forces will reach us in 35 minutes. I made my way back to the command center, leaving Sienna to coordinate the final communications with the civilian shelter network. The command center was buzzing with activity. Technicians destroying classified information, communications specialists coordinating with the remaining installations, security personnel preparing for the final defense of Cheyenne Mountain. Commander, what's our defensive situation? We have 43 personnel, mostly technical staff. Limited small arms, no heavy weapons. The mountain's blast doors are designed to withstand nuclear strikes, but not prolonged assault by specialized equipment. How long can we hold? Against conventional attack, indefinitely. The mountain is essentially impregnable, but they're not using conventional weapons. They have equipment specifically designed to breach underground installations. I looked at the tactical display. Only 4 military installations remained operational. NORAD Command, Colorado Springs, 1 facility in Texas, and 1 in Montana. The enemy forces were systematically eliminating American military resistance, and they were doing it with surgical precision. Commander, I need to make a recommendation. Go ahead. We don't implement Protocol 77 Alpha. We let them breach the facility. He stared at me. That's treason. No, it's strategy. They want to capture our technical specifications, our communication protocols, our intelligence on the civilian shelter network. But what if we give them false information? Explain. Sienna has been working on the geothermal communication system for hours. She knows every technical specification, every operational protocol, every security measure. What if we modify the system to provide false information to the enemy? Commander Rowan was quiet for a long moment. You're suggesting we let them capture the facility, then feed them false intelligence through the communication system. Exactly. They'll think they have complete control over the survivor network. They'll think they know the location of every civilian shelter. But the information will be false. And the real civilian shelters will remain invisible, hidden in complete electronic silence until the enemy forces move to other areas. It's a desperate plan. It's our only plan. The alternative is to die fighting and let them capture the real information anyway. The tactical display updated with the loss of another installation. Only 3 military facilities remained operational. The enemy forces were 30 minutes away from our location. Orion, Sienna's voice came through the communication system. I finished implementing the electronic blackout protocol. All civilian shelters are now in complete communication silence. But there's something else. What? I've been monitoring the enemy communication frequencies. They're not just eliminating underground facilities. They're preparing to establish permanent occupation forces. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? They're bringing in supplies, equipment, personnel for long-term operations. This isn't just an attack, it's a complete conquest. They're planning to occupy the United States permanently. The implications were staggering. The enemy wasn't just destroying America, they were replacing it. The nuclear strikes had eliminated the population. The systematic elimination of underground facilities was removing any possibility of resistance. The occupation forces would establish a new government, a new society, built on the radioactive ruins of American civilization. Commander, I said, we need to modify our strategy. This isn't just about survival, it's about building a resistance movement that can operate for decades. Explain. The civilian shelters represent the only hope for America's future. But they need leadership, coordination, supplies. We can't provide that from inside this mountain. What are you suggesting? We evacuate the facility, use the service tunnels to reach the surface, scatter across the country, and establish contact with the civilian shelter network. That's suicide. The surface is uninhabitable. Not immediately. Radiation levels are high, but not immediately lethal. We have radiation suits, emergency supplies, transportation. We can reach the civilian shelters and establish a real resistance network. Commander Rowan looked at the tactical display, where only 2 military installations remained operational. You're talking about abandoning the most secure facility in North America. I'm talking about saving America's future. The mountain is a fortress, but it's also a prison. We can't coordinate a resistance movement from inside a sealed bunker. How many people can we evacuate? 25, maybe 30. The rest will have to remain and implement the deception protocol. And who goes? Technical specialists, communications personnel, anyone with the skills to coordinate a resistance network. The rest stay and feed false information to the enemy. The speakers crackled with a final transmission from the remaining installations. NORAD Command, this is Colorado Springs. We are implementing Protocol 77 Alpha. Enemy forces have breached our outer defenses. Good luck. The tactical display went dark. Only NORAD Command remained operational. The systematic elimination of American military resistance was complete. Commander, I said quietly, we have 15 minutes to decide. Evacuate and build a resistance network, or stay and die defending classified information that may not matter anymore. He looked around the command center, at the 43 people who had survived the nuclear annihilation of America. How many civilian shelters are in the network? 17 confirmed. Probably more that we haven't contacted yet. Total population approximately 4,000 people. And they're all in complete electronic silence? Affirmative. They're invisible to enemy detection systems. Then we evacuate. 25 personnel, essential equipment, emergency supplies. The rest stay and implement the deception protocol. I felt a surge of desperate hope. I'll coordinate the evacuation. Sienna handles the deception protocol. Marcus organizes the essential personnel. Orion, Commander Rowan said quietly, you understand this is a one-way mission. Once we reach the surface, we're never coming back. I understand, but America's future isn't in this mountain. It's in those civilian shelters. And they need leadership. The next 15 minutes were chaos. Essential personnel gathered emergency supplies and radiation equipment. Technical specialists prepared portable communication equipment. Medical personnel gathered supplies for long-term operations. The remaining personnel prepared to implement the deception protocol that would feed false information to the enemy forces. Sienna, I said as we prepared to evacuate, the deception protocol. How long can you maintain it? Weeks, maybe months. The enemy will think they have complete control over the survivor network. They'll waste time and resources chasing false leads while the real civilian shelters remain hidden. And the real communication network will be re-established once we reach the surface. But it will be different, smaller, more secure, completely invisible to enemy detection. I looked around the command center one final time. This had been the heart of American military defense for decades. Now it was becoming a trap for the enemy forces that had destroyed our civilization. Everyone ready? I asked. 25 people nodded grimly. We were about to abandon the most secure facility in North America and venture onto the radioactive surface of a dead country. But we were also about to begin the process of rebuilding America from the ashes of nuclear annihilation. The service tunnels led to the surface through a maze of corridors and access shafts that had been carved into the mountain during the original construction. The climb took 30 minutes, through blast doors and security checkpoints that had been designed to keep enemies out. Now they were keeping survivors in. The final blast door opened onto the surface of Cheyenne Mountain. The world beyond was unrecognizable. The sky was dark with radioactive clouds. The air was thick with particles that made breathing difficult even through the radiation suits, and the landscape was covered with a fine gray dust that had once been American cities. But we were alive, and somewhere across the country, in hidden shelters and underground facilities, 4,000 Americans were waiting for leadership. All personnel, this is NORAD Command Evacuation Team. I said into the portable communication equipment. We are beginning phase 1 of the resistance operation. America will survive. The real war was just beginning, and from the radioactive ruins of our civilization, we were going to fight back. The emergency klaxons had been silent for 3 hours, but the red warning lights still bathed the NORAD command center in hellish crimson. I stood before the primary tactical display, watching the final intercept calculations scroll across the screen. The last wave of intercepts had been successful. 278 warheads destroyed, 89 reaching their targets across the continental United States. The mathematics were brutal but clear. We had saved roughly 180 million American lives while condemning 140 million more. The metallic taste of irradiated air hung in my mouth despite the facility's filtration systems. My radiation badge showed yellow. Not dangerous yet, but climbing steadily. The electromagnetic pulse from the Chicago intercept had damaged most surface equipment within a 200-mile radius, and fallout was seeping through compromised ventilation systems. The geothermal communication array hummed with activity as damage reports flooded in from surviving installations. New York City, direct strike, total loss. Los Angeles, near miss, massive casualties but infrastructure partially intact. Chicago, intercepted at 12,000 feet, electromagnetic pulse damage only. The arithmetic of nuclear warfare played out in real-time data streams. Orion, Sienna's voice crackled through the internal communication system, static distorting her words. I'm reading movement in section C7. Multiple contacts, armed, moving toward the command center. I grabbed the microphone, my hands trembling slightly from adrenaline and radiation exposure. The saboteurs who had compromised our defense systems were still inside the mountain, and they weren't finished. Commander Rowan, we have hostile contacts in the facility. They're moving toward the command center. Understood. Security teams are en route. But Orion, we've lost contact with the surface communication array. Penelope's transmission cut out 4 minutes ago. The words hit me like a physical blow. My sister had been maintaining the emergency communication link from the surface array when the final wave of warheads arrived. The surface installations had been designed to withstand near-miss detonation, but not direct electromagnetic pulse or the radiation levels now measuring 800 roentgens per hour. Sir, what was her last transmission? She reported successful coordination with Peterson Air Force Base and 3 civilian shelters in the Colorado Springs area. Total confirmed survivors, approximately 1,200 people. Then the transmission ended. I stared at the tactical display, watching the radiation readings from the surface climb steadily. The electromagnetic pulse from the Chicago intercept had damaged most surface equipment within a 200-mile radius. Anyone caught in the open would have been exposed to lethal radiation levels, minimum 600 roentgens, enough to kill within hours. The surface monitoring equipment that was still functional showed a hellscape of twisted metal and radioactive debris. The communication array where Penelope had been stationed was registering 1,200 roentgens per hour. No one could survive that level of exposure. The command center door burst open and Marcus stormed in, his sidearm drawn, followed by 2 men in civilian clothes I didn't recognize. The security breach was complete. The saboteurs had been operating inside our own facility. His face was flushed, eyes wild with the fervor of betrayal. "Step away from the communication equipment," Marcus ordered, his weapon trained on me. The smell of cordite and fear hung heavy in the recycled air. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" "Following orders. This facility is now under the control of the provisional government." The nuclear exchange was a controlled event designed to eliminate inefficient population centers and establish a new administrative structure. I felt my stomach drop. The sabotage hadn't been foreign, it had been domestic. The systematic compromise of our defense systems had been orchestrated by elements within our own government. The clicking of the Geiger counter in my pocket seemed to grow louder. You're insane. Millions of Americans are dead. Millions of inefficient Americans are dead. The survivors represent a manageable population that can be controlled and organized under the new system. Sienna appeared beside me, her face white with shock. The defense grid failures. The communication breakdowns. You sabotaged everything from the inside. We optimized everything. The cities that were struck were selected for maximum economic benefit. The cities that were saved contained the essential infrastructure and population needed for reconstruction. I looked at the tactical display, understanding the horrific logic of what had been done. The warheads that had reached their targets had struck primarily residential areas, while the industrial and military installations had been preserved through selective intercepts. The civilian shelters, I said quietly. You know their locations. Every one. The communication protocols you've been using to coordinate with them have been monitored since the beginning. We know the location of every survivor group, every supply cache, every emergency facility. Commander Rowan's voice came through the communication system. Orion, we've lost contact with the security teams. I'm implementing emergency lockdown protocols. The blast doors began sealing automatically, trapping us inside the command center with the saboteurs. But the lockdown also meant that the surviving personnel in other sections of the facility would be protected from the security breach. Marcus, I said, the people in those civilian shelters, they're innocent. They're just trying to survive. They're resources. They'll be relocated to designated reconstruction zones where they can be properly organized and controlled. I understood the terrible scope of what had been planned. The nuclear exchange hadn't been an attack. It had been a controlled demolition of American society, designed to eliminate the population that couldn't be controlled and preserve the resources that could be exploited. The communication equipment, Sienna whispered. If we can activate the emergency broadcast system, we can warn the civilian shelters. Do it, I said quietly. She moved toward the communication console, but Marcus swung his weapon toward her. Step away from the equipment. No. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space, the sound echoing off concrete walls and steel equipment. Sienna spun and fell, blood spreading across her uniform in a dark crimson stain. But she had reached the communication console and activated the emergency broadcast system with her last conscious action. All civilian shelters, this is NORAD command. You are in immediate danger. Your locations are compromised. Implement emergency relocation protocols immediately. I lunged toward Marcus, knowing that the transmission was the only warning the survivors would receive. The second gunshot caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around, but I managed to reach the communication equipment. Hot blood soaked through my uniform as I grabbed the microphone. All civilian shelters, this is NORAD command. The nuclear exchange was a controlled event. Government elements are targeting survivor groups for forced relocation. Maintain communication silence and implement emergency dispersion protocols. The third gunshot shattered the communication console in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, cutting off the transmission. But the warning had been broadcast. The civilian shelters would know they were in danger. I lay on the floor, blood pooling around me, watching the tactical display update with the final damage assessment. The nuclear exchange was over. The immediate crisis had passed, but the real war was just beginning. My shoulder burned with pain, and I could feel my strength ebbing with each heartbeat. Orion, Sienna's voice was weak but clear, her breathing shallow and labored. The geothermal communication system. It's hardwired into the mountain's geological structure. They can't destroy it. I looked at the low-frequency transmitters built into the mountain itself. The massive copper conductors extended deep into the Earth's crust, designed to be undetectable and indestructible. The emergency broadcast had been transmitted through conventional radio equipment, but the geothermal system could maintain contact with the civilian shelters indefinitely. Marcus, I said, you've made a mistake. The civilian shelters are no longer under your control. It doesn't matter. We know their locations. We have the resources to find them eventually. No, you don't. The emergency broadcast warned them to implement dispersion protocols. They're scattering across the country, establishing new locations, new identities. You'll never find them all. I could see the doubt in his eyes. The controlled demolition of American society had been designed to create a manageable population of survivors. But the warning broadcast had given the civilian shelters the information they needed to disappear completely. The geothermal communication system, Sienna said weakly. It's already transmitting updated protocols to the civilian shelters. They're coordinating the dispersion operation. Marcus moved toward the geothermal equipment, but the copper conductors were built into the mountain structure itself. Massive cables embedded in solid granite, protected by tons of rock and steel. There was no way to destroy them without demolishing the entire facility. You can't stop the transmission, I said, tasting blood in my mouth. The civilian shelters are already implementing the new protocols. They're becoming invisible. The tactical display updated with new information. The civilian shelters were confirming receipt of the emergency protocols and beginning immediate relocation. Within hours, they would be scattered across the country, hidden in locations that the provisional government couldn't predict or control. Green dots representing shelter locations began blinking out one by one as they went dark. Orion. Commander Rowan's voice came through the emergency communication system, crackling with static from radiation interference. We've regained control of the facility. The saboteurs have been contained, but the surface communication array is destroyed. We've lost contact with Penelope. I closed my eyes, understanding the cost of our victory. We had saved millions of American lives, but we had lost the people who mattered most. My sister was gone, killed by the radiation that had made the surface uninhabitable. Sienna was dying beside me, her breathing growing weaker with each passing moment. The country we had fought to protect no longer existed. Commander, I said into the emergency communicator, my voice hoarse from blood and smoke, the civilian shelters are implementing emergency dispersion protocols. They're scattering across the country. The provisional government won't be able to find them. Understood. We're maintaining contact through the geothermal system. Total confirmed survivors, approximately 4,000 people in 17 shelter groups. I looked at the tactical display, watching the civilian shelters disappear from the tracking system as they implemented the dispersion protocols. They were becoming invisible, hidden in the radioactive ruins of American civilization. The geothermal communication system will maintain contact, Sienna said, her voice barely audible, each word a struggle. They'll coordinate the resistance movement. America will survive. I held her hand as she died, feeling the warmth leave her fingers while the Geiger counter in my pocket continued its relentless clicking. The tactical display updated with the final casualty reports. 140 million Americans dead, 180 million alive, 4,000 in hidden shelters. The nuclear exchange was over. The immediate crisis had passed. But the real war was just beginning. The victory was complete. We had saved America from annihilation, but we had lost everything that made America worth saving. The civilian shelters would survive, hidden in the radioactive wasteland, carrying the memory of what we had been and the hope of what we might become again. But the cost had been everything. My sister was gone, her final transmission lost in the electromagnetic chaos of nuclear detonation. Sienna was dead, her blood now cold on the concrete floor. The country we had fought to protect was a radioactive ruin where the surface measured 800 roentgens per hour and would remain uninhabitable for decades. I sat alone in the command center, surrounded by the wreckage of our civilization, listening to the geothermal communication system transmit coordination protocols to the invisible survivors. The mountain fortress had become a tomb, but somewhere in the radioactive darkness, America was still alive. The clicking of radiation detectors provided a constant reminder of what we had lost. The protocol was complete. We had won the war and lost everything else. But in the scattered civilian shelters, hidden in the ruins of our civilization, the real America would survive. And someday, when the radiation faded and the provisional government collapsed, we would rebuild from the ashes of what we had been. The tactical display went dark. The emergency was over. The real war was just beginning.